I think Rob has set us up perfectly to move into our first panel discussion, where you hopefully can see that I have pinned 4 videos on the first screen of Zoom. These are the 4 panelists, so I would like to especially welcome Rob, Sharon, Holly, and Tudelany for joining us today. We are going to simply reflect a bit about where we are, because our 4 panelists represent 4 very different places in career stages. So we would like to hear from each of you about what you feel works well being a mentor and in the mentoring relationships that you've developed.
You want me to go? Do we
have I'll let you process it for a second, but feel free to jump in.
Okay. I'm beginning my 3rd year in a tenured faculty role at UWF in instructional design technology. I feel authenticity. That's my word. That's what with creating courses, creating relationships, mentoring students, whether they're at the undergraduate, master's, or doctorate level. It's just that authenticity. I love the students. I love what I do. I love reaching out. I want them to know very heartfelt and I'm authentic, and reach out to me. I am here. I do, I may not know the answer, but I will find out, and that I'm extremely approachable. So in mentoring students, whether we have cohort-based doctoral program, which is wonderful. They interact with each other. We foster those interactions, but also in their Slack channels that they invite me to be part of the group, responding, and again, being that authentic person of, some of the things we are working through this together. And, we have that instructor-student relationship, but then there's also that they know that I'm going to be straight up, and if I don't know the answer, I'll find it out. So I would say out of everything with mentoring is the authenticity, that I care and I'm approachable and reach out to me.
Well, since we're all sort of being mute, let me go ahead and I'll throw in my 2 cents worth. I'm at the post-career period where I'm actually retired, and but I'm still engaged in and involved in a lot of the things in terms of the profession as a whole, and working and being with people. And it's kind of interesting because we talk about mentoring as if there's a close date. And in my experience, there hasn't been a close date on some of those people I have been working with and mentored years and years and years and years ago, are still as part of my circle, as for want of a better word to say. And periodically I hear from them, or I reach out to them, because they are people who I feel have given me a great deal, but they in turn would say that I've given them a great deal over time. So even though I am in this post-career period, I'm still finding myself very engaged in working with and being with folks who are still involved in, more actively engaged in the profession. So I feel like mentoring doesn't have an end date as much as it has a point at which someone may move to another stage of their life and may sort of move away from you for a while, but periodically they come back. It's kind of, and it's nice to have that reconnect in many ways to some of those folks. So a lot of what we've said about mentoring, I totally am on target with, but a lot of it has to do, I think, with that, and it go back to that whole sense of that relationship. When you build that relationship, it really ends up being, in many cases, a very lasting and profound relationship.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would be regarded by most as a senior faculty member, still a few years away from retirement, still enjoying what I do. And my favorite part is working with students. And answering the question and reaffirming already what has been said by Holly and Sharon, let me try to focus on just a couple of things that might be different, although I like to think I do a lot of the things that they've said, but I'm also listening to see what I might change and do even better. But the message that I try to do is when I am meeting with a student, and most of the time it's a PhD student, but almost any student, I immediately say, hey, look, this is an initial conversation, and the purpose is to build a relationship. And I do consider it a two-way relationship. And I actually have an initial advisement protocol with some specific items. And the purpose of the protocol is to communicate to the student, I am here to support you. And I go through a litany of different actions, everything from their, okay, here's your program, you'll do a program of study and you'll have research and you've got this first year set of activities. I refer to them as student colleagues, and therefore that sets me up to talk with them about expectations. And I make it very clear, you're here, you've got expectations, I'd like to hear about them and I'll learn them. And I've got expectations, and my expectations are intended to represent the program, but also still to help you do and achieve whatever it is you need to do. And if it changes, that's fine. And I go through a nice, 45 minutes, an hour, however long it takes, but a nice solid thing about answering questions and really trying to make it centered on them. But then here you go, team. At the end of the meeting, before we set up the schedule for the next meeting, I usually say something along these lines. I'm here for you. I'll work with you, but you need to make sure you succeed in spite of me. And that usually kind of throws them off for a little bit, just for a second, because the message I'm trying to say is that, hey, I'm with you, I'm for you. You're the one that has to do the work. Treat me as a resource. I treat you as a colleague. Please know that as we grow in this relationship, you're the one that's going to graduate. You're the one that's going to be walking across the stage. You're the one that's going to be doing research and establishing and making a name for yourself. And I'm glad to be part of it. And then I kind of just stop. So yeah, everything we've been saying and is really good. I just wanted to add that my initial meeting is geared toward helping them understand that whatever their goals are, their expectations are, I'm here to help them do that. They'll get a chance to learn me as we go over the years. Thanks.
I think part of the joy of going last is that you can just copy what everybody else has said and say, I agree. So I think I was told the other day that I'm apparently in my mid-career. I don't know where the cutoff was or when I entered, but I think that's where I am. And I recognize that I'm looking at Tanya's prompts on what works well. I think for me, part of that is still figuring that out. And there's a little bit of intentionality in that for me. It's because I always tell my students that my goal is not to replicate myself. I think the world already has enough of one of me. I can't imagine there being more than one. So with that in mind, then the goal is for me to support and help them figure out who they want to be. And my job is really to support that. But I recognize that at the beginning, it's the old adage of you teach how you were taught. So most of my mentoring style reflected Simon Hooper, who was my mentor. And I kept moving on to that, but I started to realize that it's not really possible for me to have the same mentoring style for every one of my students because they all have a different need. So I guess if there is one mentoring style that I tend to go with, it's really more about trying to be open to what they need from me. But I think really the emphasis for me is just to say, look, I have my PhD. I kind of have a good idea of who I am. The goal is for me to help you realize your goals, and let's work together in figuring out sort of what do you need. Sometimes, Callie can attest to this because we work together. I tend to be very open in a lot of ways that there's no boundaries. I can I color all over the page. Some students respond very well to that. Some students of mine said, no, I need a very rigid structure. So I think for me I've been learning to adapt to those different ways to mentor my students.
I think that's a great response to Delaney and leads us right into an audience participation question given to us by Marissa. So she's curious about how to deal with students who need more structure or help them realize that they need structure when they believe they don't. And Holly, I see that you started to respond in the chat. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Sure. And it is just like others have said, we have to figure that out for each student. And I'm figuring that out for myself too, as being a mentor, that there is a tremendous shift that happens, just like Rob said, that, the transition of the harder hand of this is your degree. We have our degrees. It's now the onus is on you, the student. I am here. I will be here to help you. And I assume the good intentions and good success at first. But if they need the more structure, if they are missing deadlines, we establish this out. This is this is where you want to be. Let's, when do you want to graduate? Let's back up the goals here. And if there's, assume success at first, but then different students are going to respond differently. That's one of the things about the personalities too. It just, I have the way that I respond well, and having those conversations of, getting to know the student as an individual student. What are they going to respond to? The students that are in the military, they are very different. The typical, that I have several that I'm thinking through now that are men, they're in the military, they are very structured. They want that structure. And so I'm going to handle the communication, conciseness, goals, tasks very differently with this student than some of the other students that I have that may be coming back to school after 25 years. They have children, they're in a different stage of their careers. So, but there is that main shift, that transition goes to, this is your degree. I will help you, but you have to be the captain of your ship and drive this and never lose sight of that.
Yes, Holly. Maybe I'm about to disclose a little bit of I think it's the owl, what was the manipulative bird? I might be disclosing a little bit. The peacock, okay. So it might be a little bit of peacock coming out of this dove right now. When a student struggles with structure, I ask them to be the lead on any team project. Small, not too many consequences, if, whatever. It's amazing when someone has to lead a project with a team of 3 or 4 people, other students, peers of students. It's amazing how quickly they either rise to the occasion or return to you with, say, give me some tips on how to make this happen. And now I have a door in which I can enter, and they're usually more amenable to listening to me about they need structure. I hope that wasn't too manipulative.
I'd like to throw in a couple of, I agree with both Holly and Rob in terms of the overall ideas that they're sharing with us. But I think it's also important for us to sometimes admit that this is not a relationship that's going to work. This is not a person with whom I'm going to be able to build that kind of really, truly collegial mentoring, building kind of relationship. And I speak very specifically to a very, I'll call him strong-willed Saudi student who was assigned to me as an advisee. And I was trying to develop that kind of mentoring relationship with him in addition to this, here's the structure of the program, here's what you have to do, when do you want to graduate, we'll go, that was just a road too far for him, because he was a very, as I said, a very strong-willed Saudi. He was not going to work with a woman, no matter how strong-willed I might be, he was not going to do that. And so I had to go to someone and say, look, this isn't a relationship I can develop. This is not a working thing. He's just, I think it's better if we have a man work with him. I'm recommending that we get together as a threesome over a cup of tea and talk a little bit further, and then just sort of myself melting away. And it worked out. I mean, he slipped out of it, and it's a very important thing for him, because he actually came back to me at the end of the whole thing and said, thank you for changing my advisor. I really did appreciate that you were thoughtful enough to think that this might be a better person for me to work with. Blew me off the planet at that point, because I didn't even expect that kind of response. But I think we need to be careful that we may be working ourselves to the bone when we don't need to be.
We've
I
had
love
another.
Oh,
Go
sorry, I
ahead.
was gonna say, I love that you mentioned that. I didn't have an exactly similar scenario, but when I started at Oklahoma State, I took over our course for pre-service teachers. And so I started mentoring a lot of GTAs that were teaching the class. But I changed the class pretty dramatically. And they were able to, kind of keep teaching it the same initial way that first semester. But I asked them to make some changes just to the approach and how they were doing things that second semester. And one of the students, she wasn't convinced. I think, she thought I was too young and didn't have enough experience. And she just absolutely was not interested in mentoring and in having, a communicative relationship with me as someone who was overseeing her assistantship. She was just not interested at all. And it was, a lot of hard conversations, but ultimately, ultimately she ended up, not teaching the course anymore, but she's on a path that is more aligned with actually what she wanted to do. So, I mean, it definitely ended up working out, but to your point, sometimes we stress ourselves out and we try to force it and make things work, when sometimes it's not a right fit.
Which kind of leads us into an interesting picture of looking at when it's not a right fit, or how do we help our students with dealing with failure. Rebecca, before I get into a full prompt that we have, Rebecca had a question in the chat about any of our panelists' thoughts on micro failures. Letting students fail on a small scale to come through. How do our mentors feel about that particular approach?
I understand the concept, and I don't intend to let anyone fail. Similar to what I was mentioning about, giving them things that challenge them. I think I would just monitor it closely and talk about what's happening if I see them failing, but I won't let them fail per se.
Understanding that failure is a concept that we in America have trouble with, and a lot of other countries, they actually promote small incremental, amounts of failure, not a great word, but less success, so that you can improve and do better and strive, a lot more. And so one of the things that made me think of this was one of my mentees, she kept pushing back. Oh, get this done. I'll get this done. I know you got to look at it. And I set a hard deadline. And I said, look, if you don't get it to me by X, it's not going to be ready by Y. And I can't look at it. Right. And she didn't get it to me by X. I literally could not look at it. It wasn't because I was trying to be punitive, because that is not my personality. Right. Mm-hmm. And she turned over what she needed to turn over, and just, got a lot of feedback that some of it might have been caught if I had had time with it. Right. and she wouldn't have had to, have all these other professors going bleh at her. So it's just a thought. I don't know. What do you all think?
Yeah, see, because I'm not sure I call that failure. That sounds a lot like learning to
Right.
me, but I may be mixed up.
Well, and that's why I was like, if you will, me in quotes, right? Maybe I don't know what else to call.
Yeah.
I
I
can
think,
share. Oh, go ahead, too, Lady.
sorry. For me, Rebecca, I think the way that I interpreted your prompt, I think it I had two advisors for my program because I was in two different programs, and one, Simon Hooper, was very much about, hey, come in, let's explore, let's discover. I used to joke around and say that I would come into his office. I wanted to come into his office one day and say that I wanted to do a project on instructional design of cats, and just to be able to put him in a position where he says, no, that's a bad idea, you shouldn't do that. But he never did. He's always come in, let's explore that. Then I had my other advisor who was really about, no, you're going in the wrong direction. You need to change that. He was very much more directive. So I'm wondering if that's sort of what you're talking about, where how far do you let the student kind of go in that direction and discover on their own before you kind of pivot and say, no, this is not the right direction. Is that sort of what you're trying to get at, or is it really more you really fail?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, failure is a terrible word. We use it a lot in the United States, and it was the only one that it kind of could draw to very quickly. But yeah, that's what I'm pretty much getting at, Lainey. And Stephanie had a great way. She says, I wonder if a way to frame this is facilitating reflection on practices and how to improve those over time. That's a great way to frame it. I love that.
And see, along with that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that was where I don't think it's intentionally, and this is, I think what Rob, you said too, it's not an intentional, like you're saying, Rebecca, failure is a strong word of, like I was saying, I assume success, they're going to be successful, but then when they realize, oh, I really need more structure here, it's that coming to grips with this, again, back to this is your degree, you are the captain of your ship, I am here to help you, let me help, us be accountable, let's set up this structure if you need more structure. And Rick, I love the idea of the app. I've already gone there to look at this, and even for my own writing and my own accountability of working with others, that because I'm definitely a mentee and I'm a mentor, and I can see both sides of these relationships here of, okay, I need somebody to be my accountability partner on my own writing. So thank you.
Yeah, see, that accountability and that working with others, that helps out a lot, because it allows me to always say, well, what did your other colleague, peer, partner, friend say about it? Another thing, when you believe a student or someone of mentees failing, I get very clear. I said, hey, you're doing this. My experience has showed me, here's what you can expect if you keep putting off this deadline. Here's what you can expect if you don't get peer review. And I use the language, here's what you can expect. And then I kind of end it with saying, look, check this out with some of your other colleagues, especially other professors, maybe some other instructors. And next time we meet, let me know what you're hearing from them, and we'll calibrate and make sure we do what's best for you. But right now, here's what I think you should expect. And then you can be clear with them.
Well, I totally agree that there's a point at which you need to, perhaps, I don't want to call it interfere or step in, but there's a point at which you need to say, look, this is leading you down this path. Now, is that where you want to go? Because I'm not too comfortable with that, but if that's the direction you want to go, okay. But if you want to go to what you established earlier with me in sense of what I perceive to be your goals, this isn't the path to get there, or it's a very crooked path and we'll have to do a lot of correction on the way. And so I think that that's a very good point, is that there's maybe, you know, a point at which you kind of have to step up and say, not what I see is really truly on your path.
Rick, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure and let the panel share their thoughts first. But since we're talking about failure, some of you know a little bit about this, but we've been kind of pushing this a little bit in our department to normalize it a little bit, because we realized that our students got really anxious about failing, and they saw successes from others, and then it, you know, made them feel like they were even worse failures and things like that. And it started, we were in the lab, in our little student lab, and one of the students made some comment about how, you know, we must not, she'd been rejected from a journal and we must not know what that's like or whatever. And we went, oh, sweetheart, we get rejected all the time. You just get used to that. That's just the way it is, you know? And I shared the story with her that once, one of my favorite rejections is that I got rejected from this paper, and the reviewer said, next time, can you please get a native English speaker to edit your paper? And I went, oh shoot, not only am I a native English person, but editing was my minor. Like, I am a native English editor. That is me. And anyway, and I shared that story, and it was with a Chinese student. This was a Chinese student. And it just helped her feel so much better about this, that like, this happens to Rick too. Rick has to get native English editors as well, you know, like, this is normal. And because of this, we decided we were going to do a book for students primarily, but for anyone, about failure. And you may have seen me advertise this a little bit on PIDT, but I'd love to encourage you guys to participate. I've already gotten one contribution from Ali Karshelman that's really outstanding. Just to tease it a little bit, it's about getting F-bombed at a conference presentation and then turning it around into a publication. So isn't that a beautiful story of failure turning into success? So anyway, here's the call right here, but we're looking for just short examples because we've all had them, right? These failure experiences. And I think talking about mentoring, students and newer scholars, you know, untenured folks, they need to realize that failure is very normal and it's part of the academic journey. And that's just part of, you learn from it and you keep going. And that's what we're hoping this book can do. So hopefully you guys will contribute some stories to this book.
Thank you for that, Stephanie.
Yeah, I can't top you, Rick, on that. Those are great stories. And I hope as an editor to never create one of those stories. Okay, so
I'll tell you real quick, Stephanie, before you go, it's made me a lot more careful about recommending native English editors, because I used to, you know, you never know if somebody is really a different language speaker or not, and maybe it doesn't even matter, you know, sometimes.
Right.
Anyway, so.
Right. So I wanted to circle back. I'm chewing on this idea of like mentoring as a form of facilitating reflective practice, and I wanted to ask the panelists, you know, are there certain like key points for students throughout their journey? Are there certain things that you want them reflecting on or thinking about at that particular stage? So we've kind of been talking like all over the mentoring process, right? And some things kind of pertain here or there or whatever. But I'm just wondering, like, are there certain conversations that you try to have at a certain point with students, depending on where they are? And I realized that as I was shaping this question in my mind, I was like, you know, if I could do a cognitive task analysis of what Rob does with his students, I would totally do that. So I think that's a little bit of this, right? Like just trying to understand, especially from those who more experience mentoring and advising students, you know, what are some of the common themes that you see come up, and how do those tie maybe to different stages of their studies?
I'm going to throw in 2 cents on this one because I think this is a very important point. And I don't necessarily do this at the beginning, and I don't always do it just with students. I also do it with young faculty because I think it's a very critical thing. we become so pointed, we become so focused on this outcome, whatever it happens to be. In the case of doc students, it's graduating. I want to be done. I want to be graduated. I want to be Dr. Hank Klink, and I really want to be, or Henrietta Klink. I really want to be out there in the real world. I really want to be a professor. I really want to do these things. It's like, okay, good. Do you have a personal life? Do you have a favorite thing you like to do? Is there anything in your life that, any family members in your life that are important to you that perhaps maybe you don't get to connect with often, like mom and dad live in New Jersey and you're living in Florida? Those are important elements, as well as wanting to become Dr. Klink. It's very important for you to think about that the other aspects of who you are, because if you erase those from yourself, if you take those away from who you are, at some point in time, you're going to go home wearing the sticky badge that says, hello, my name is mom, my name is dad, my name is wife, my name is husband, because nobody will know who you are in that other part of who you are. And I think that we become so focused on the academics, we become so focused on the outcomes. All of us do. I mean, I'm just as guilty as the rest, but it's remembering that you are a person also. And there's that other part of you that you can't forget.
Sharon, can I please extend on that and emphasize it? Yes, yes, and yes. And let me go slow because I want to channel the late Professor Don Ely. Now, most of you know Don Ely. Some of you met him. If you don't, Don Ely, professor extraordinaire. He was at Syracuse University. I completed my doctorate at Virginia Tech, went to Syracuse University, in the office with Phil Doty, Dave Krathwall. My office, they assigned me. I took the office that was just vacated by Charles Rygluth, okay? All right? And John Keller's old office was next door. I just want to let you know the vibes that were going around, okay? In that environment, Don Ely, I'm new professor, new family, young family. I went to the gym every day nearby, shot some hoops when I first got there. All right, Sharon's talking about the balance, the family, the other things. Don Ely was there doing swimming 2 or 3 times a week. After about a year or so, I wasn't going to the gym. Don Ely came by my door, knocked on the door and said, Rob, we've got a problem. I'm publishing, Don. I'm doing this, Don. I'm teaching. I get good course reviews. He said, no. I haven't seen you at the gym. That was problematic. Let me just stop there. That's the anecdote. Thank you, Sharon. I don't want to take away. I just wanted to extend to what you're saying. Please hear that. Now, I do have a specific thing since I was implicated, Stephanie. You know, when students, there's a point after maybe comp, certainly after prospectus, when they've got a bona fide dissertation proposal agreed upon, I start changing my language to things like, so, oh, this is good. Let's think about this because maybe a year or so from now, when you are in my seat supervising students, and I let them hear this, and it's amazing, at least to me, if you ask the question, you know, at what point and what kind of things do we say that maybe help some kind of turning point? Sorry, I didn't mean to prolong or take us off track, but the point I wanted to make is I actually start asking them when they're writing and they're going back and forth to shift the dependence to where they really do become the leader of our relationship. Anyway, thanks, Sharon, for letting me extend on the balance thing. I think that's important.
You know, Sharon, I appreciate that you mentioned that it's not just with students, but even with new faculty as well, because, you know, now I'm out at the University of New Mexico and our program chair is Victor Law, and I just adore working with Victor because he reorients the conversation in the way that you're talking about, that it's not just, you know, how are you getting, you know, publications and meeting these metrics. I mean, sure, it's, you know, supporting whatever. But Victor is always very focused on a conversation about, you know, what is going to bring you joy in this work. And I don't think that we don't have those kinds of conversations very often. You know, you don't hear people use words like joy very often. And I appreciate that he brings, and it's very sincere too. So I appreciate that he brings back, you know, these ideas of like, what's going on in your personal life? How do we find balance? And we have a new dean here who like actively signals to people, you know, he has a note on all of his emails that says, you know, I may send this at unusual hours, but don't misinterpret that to mean you should be responding to me at unusual hours. So I appreciate like some of the messaging and the communication that goes on around, you know, how do we find balance? How do we bring in some of that joy? Anyway, I like that you're leaning into how do we help people remember, you know, the aspects that where faculty is a job, it's not our life, right? And we need to make sure that we bring back in our life as well and try to maintain that as we go. So thank you.
As far as reflections and in our courses and in some of the just mentoring relationships, I love having the students write. Just, you know, it can be very short, even what, you know, after their first year, what would you want to tell yourself when you first got here? You know, you've been here a year. What do you wish you had known when you first started the program? What have you learned in this first year? And then having them do this the second year, and then I have them go back and read what they have written after that first year. And it's so interesting. It's almost like the cognitive, you know, the pre-test, and then they have the content during the semester, and then you go and you give the exact same test. Very similar to that, but is the reflections on not only this particular semester, or what are you worried about in the coming semesters? What are your, and what do you anticipate? What are those questions? And then even after a year, they go back and read that, and the self-actualization of how much they've learned and where they have developed just emotionally and attitudinally just in that short year. It's amazing. And they love going back and then reading that.
Yeah, I'm seeing Rick's post to that too. And Rick, that's what I'm thinking about starting up now as well. Is I'm not sure about monthly. I'm not sure, like right now, my sense of students is very fatigued. But but creating some sort of routine or rhythm, right, where we're coming together, even if like it's a small subset of a community. But they're also able to interact with other students who are at very different stages throughout the process so that we can share across those stages as well. Yeah, I love that for sure reflection idea too. Thank you, Bob.
I want to extend that idea a little bit. I'm going to deviate from our plan. We have about 10 minutes left in the session, and I'm not going to ask the last question because this conversation has been fantastic. But there was something that Rob initiated decades ago. It's really bizarre to say it that way, where there was a student-led research team of his advisees and other students. Over the years, this is where various publications around sentence period spacing have been added to the literature base, including Wikipedia citations and interesting conversations at AECT. When I came into the program, and this is where it's been really fun because Rob, of course, was my major professor, is one of my lifelong mentors. I came into the program and we were sunsetting the sentence period spacing aspect of the team, but we needed a new research question. So we asked past alumni, Rob's past students, about their experiences working in this student-led research team. And the number one finding, of which there is a publication around this particular study, it is available in the Ed Media Yearbook. But the number one finding that we got from the alumni was that every single one of his students were considering a similar structure because it allowed this near peer mentoring to occur amongst the students themselves. I've adopted it. Here I am a decade later. I have the STEM education research group here at U of I that I'm very sad to leave as I head to Alaska. but I have undergraduates, master students, doc students, local around the country. I have one out in Virginia right now. We meet bi-weekly. They are self-supporting and sustaining in as much as what I bring to the table. We have a Slack channel with our Slack workspace with various channels. They have their own writing group that is spun out of this. This is your legacy, Rob. This is what you've helped create.
Well, I'm humble and I appreciate that. And that's why participating on panels like this mean a lot to me. I've picked up 2 or 3 things that I'm going to actually add to whatever you might call mentoring. So, certainly to all of you colleagues and my fellow panelists, Tanya, thanks for mentioning that. But I got to tell you, everything that was said here today has meaning, and I'm even still trying to learn how to implement them to make them better. So as we continue this, even this session and the other PID sessions, I'm still learning. Thank you.
So as we close out, I'd like to ask this one last question of our panelists. This will close out the first half of today's session, and then we'll transition into the second piece. But what is something that has not worked for you as a mentor? Let's learn from our mentorship failures together.
One student particularly coming to mind is, I don't want to say being too nice, but I need to be firmer. I need to draw those boundaries, and she's such a capable student. But I think I'm not being hard enough, maybe. So, but each student's going to be different. And so as I'm saying it, I'm trying to figure out, along the same lines of the question was asked, how do you reach the students that need more structure? I'm struggling with that right now, of that balance of she's so capable, how hard can I be? So that's not working right now with figuring out this one particular student that is very strong, very capable, somewhat intimidating in some ways too. So how to navigate that?
I think mine's very similar to Holly's in a sense that I had a student who, I don't want to, I guess the vernacular way to say it is, sucked me into her life. And I became an integral part of who she was. And I realized it wasn't just being a friend, it was something beyond that. And it was really this, she was extremely needy, and she just pulled and pulled and pulled until I started reciprocating by giving and giving and giving. And I came to the realization that was not a healthy relationship for either one of us. And I basically stepped back as quickly, but as gradually as I could from that relationship, to sort of erase myself from that integral part of her life that was not the appropriate place for me to be. So it's one of those things where you have to know where the line in the sand is, where stepping over that line is really too far or too much or too engaging. And so you have to kind of know how to sort of maneuver or manage that place, where that place is and how to manage it.
I think for me, what has not worked is when I have had a successful student graduate and try to apply that same exact template to the student who comes next, especially around dissertation advising, and it just didn't work. And I think the takeaway for me, what I was getting, especially from what both Sharon and Rob were saying, is the importance of really getting to know your students if you're going to be a good mentor. But I think I want to also introduce something, or maybe not introduce, but just kind of mention something that we didn't really chat about, is the importance of culture in that relationship as well. Because we have a lot of students who are coming from a lot of different communities, a lot of different cultures within the US and abroad. When I was a PhD student, it does not matter how often Dr. Hooper told me to call him Simon. I couldn't do that because that just, not what we do. And I'm sure Rob can attest to that from Southern Africa's standpoint. Once you're a prof, you're a prof. It doesn't matter whether you're at the bar or you're in the library, that's your name. So that doesn't change. So I think it's also really getting to tap into the culture of that learner and being able to say, okay, maybe the idea of me inviting you over to my house might work in building the community the way that I work with my other students, but that might not work from where you come from. So let me kind of figure out how to tap into that. So I think really the cultural component is an integral part of that mentoring relationship. But for me, whenever I've ignored that, that's really when I have failed, because I'm like, oh no, this student did it this way and we really had great success and published many papers. So let me apply that method. And every time you always have to tweak because it just never works the same way every time around.
Let me take a line from my esteemed colleague, Dr. Tulaney, and say one of the advantages of going last is I can say ditto to all the things that have gone ahead of me. And I got to tell you, that I was almost overwhelmed because like, man, there's so many things that didn't work, but it was also a process of correcting them. So if I may, Tanya and company, I want to give homage to somebody who's on this call, and that's Dr. Sharon Smaldino, because many things I learned to go to people who I believe cared for me and had my best interest at heart. As you know, I'm a past AECT president. Sharon Smaldino is a past AECT president. When I was thinking about it, I was like, I can't be, I'm just I just started department head. I can't do all these things and do all that too. She said, Rob, I'm a dean. I made it as ACT president. And just hearing her say that, well, I'm going to say that I was mentored. Thanks, Sharon. Let me say that publicly to you.
I just threw in, I'll say publicly, thank you. I'm looking at a lot of the people who are sitting here, and at some point in time, I have had the opportunity to have a conversation with you, and later somebody comes back, Rob just did now, and tell me that something I said, and I just said it because I thought it was the right thing to say in that conversation. I wasn't trying to influence you in any particular way, but it's gratifying to know that when you have an opportunity to interact with someone and that person feels that what that interaction has been valuable to them is probably the best part, and the reward you get for being involved in a mentoring relationship is knowing that some point in time in the future, someone might come back and say, I want to thank you for that comment because that really made a difference in my life. And it's just, it feels good, and thanks.
I can't think of a better way to conclude this part of today's session. So thank you to our panelists. A round of applause. I believe we're going to take a break. Jill, how long do we want to take?
Let's take a 10-minute bio break. And then what we're going to do as you're grabbing a snack or whatever you're doing right now in the next 10 minutes is taking reviewing emails or stuff. We're going to kind of transition the conversation to how do we prepare our mentees for handling and mitigating systemic challenges in the workplace. And we have a panel that's going to talk about that from different perspectives, but really think about how do we prepare them for how to be open and flexible as individuals once they leave us, and we don't have, as we're trying to prepare them to, to take the training wheels off when they're done. That's going to be the next half of our session this afternoon.